was going to do that.
Another reason I'll also put it out there that I don't blame anyone for not expecting G2 to just immediately win a big event like this is the other factor, as well as the Saw component of like how would he work with this. The probably the biggest question mark of all is actually just huNter. Remember, he wasn't an in-game leader before. People now can just look and go, well, it's awesome change. And, you know, there was all the rumours he should have done it all these years. Like, the problem with that is, you know, this is someone who used to play, mate. There are so many stories of people who maybe, you know, over a bite, like, oh, maybe one day I'll become the in-game leader. Or the worst ones, obviously, everyone knows the twists and the cold eras of the world. The one when they did it as the secondary caller or the Yakindars, and it worked awesome. I mean, my joke would even be for Yakindar. Please learn the lesson that actually surely what Furia shows you is you are a good secondary caller. You're just not the fucking main IGL, mate. Like, that just isn't your role, at least at this point in your career, because I feel like the problem you have with that move of like a player, notice it's always the player where they either did calls or some component. I mean, people said that huNter used to call whatever the fucking pistol rounds or whatever in G2, but it was always, if you ever saw interviews, it was always implied people thought he could be an in-game leader or maybe he would become one day. And it's nearly always a player where you have some past history doing something extra, maybe not the primary caller, but you do something with it. And then crucially, it's nearly always that you're supposed to be like a smart player because people just assume that has some sort of direct correlation with being an IGL. And I do think it does, but I think the part they always miss is this, mate. Like, I actually think if you're huNter, it is the perfect time to do this. It's why I even get why suddenly all these conversations about Nico keep coming up, mate. Because Nico's having like the worst month and a half of his whole career at this moment. That's the best time ever to switch to IGL. When you know you're actually not going to be a top individual player, then there's nothing left to worry about. The real issue I have, mate, and the reason why it'll sound harsh, because obviously I don't really know what these people are thinking. I'm speculating. But I'm sorry, I did already guess. I don't claim to be a genius. I already knew, spoiler, that Yakindar wouldn't be a great IGL, Twists wouldn't be. And the reason why actually is the last fact. It's nothing to do with are they smart, can they secondary call, would they like to do the role? It's that, mate, if you still sort of feel like, yeah, but anytime I feel like I could just go back to being really good, that's going to be in the back of your fucking mind, mate. And I feel like you won't truly like commit 100%. Because I think when you do this role, you really do have to decide, like, right, basically what I'm saying is I'm not just becoming the IGL. Like, it's going to be the end of my career if I'm not a good IGL. Like, that's it. I'm transitioning forever. From this day forwards, all I do... by the way, I do think some of the classic examples in the past, that's why I think the old IGLs that swapped from non-IGL roles tended to be more like supportive elements because they didn't even have some fantasy that they're still the star player. Like, it's funny that people still to this day probably don't even know that, like, almost all those Danish IGLs played with Glaive at some point in time. You were there with some of them where it was like people like MSL or Carragher. Later, nearly all of them had some period where they were just a player, but the difference is they aren't tortured afterwards. But could I still be a top player? And what if I move to this team? Or even worse, I can tell you, I'll just say it right now, I know the rumours. I'll tell you in Team Liquid, it's even worse than that, guys. Even though if you're Twists, this is totally fine. He is a very good player and he hasn't IGL'd for very long. The other players in the team, Pimp and you, or also if his IGLing doesn't go well now, he might just abandon ship as we're going down and join like actually a Vitality or a FaZe as like another player again. He won't even be going as IGL. Well, the problem with that is you can't have that in the background of a project you're building. You have to, again, I know it's an old school concept, but like they're saying it, remember in the Navy is the captain goes down with his ship. The idea is if you're the captain, you're just committed to this. So one, I do like that huNter made the change because I do feel like, mate, this last year or so, in fact, CS2, let's just be real, he was hanging on for dear life, mate. He wasn't the player, he wasn't... People forget this, Pimp. In CS2, not only was he like an MVP candidate at one of those prestige events, I think it was maybe kind of 8, I can't remember. It was that or Cologne, I forget which one. But I remember, as a result, for that year, he was even like quite high up in like HLTV list. Like, that's like the 1 year of his career where he like peaked. His problem is, after that, he had maybe some of his worst years of his career once he got to tier 1. So one, I love the timing of the change. But then two, look, it's really early days, so let's not over-exaggerate. But I tell you what, out the gate, it looked fucking great, mate. Like, I'm not even just talking about pure, like, T-side win rates. Just think of some of the rounds. Like, on that Inferno, you have to remember, that was the map that Vitality was, like, unbeatable on in Season 1, mate. No one could do shit to these guys. Especially, by the way, when they swapped to CT side. They just farm you. You could never get a fucking bomb down. Some of the, like, push-pull on the Inferno game in this final was unbelievable, Pimp. Like, they were, like, actually completely, like, just toying with Vitality, like, manoeuvring them. Like, the calls here, you'd never believe this was like a new squad in G2. You'd think they were both equally experienced or something. What did you think of the IGL side of it? What do you think of huNter in the early doors, but what do you think of him as an IGL?
That's the thing, yeah. You struck a nerve, and I'll get back to that. But speaking on huNter specifically, I think that's also goes into to speak about Saul. In there's probably no better coach, to make that transition with. I think it's the same thing we used to say about Brolin and Cyclone. Cyclone is probably a great coach in order to include and form and I guess capture what it's like to be a new in-game leader for Brolin within Mouse, which we also did see went pretty well in the beginning. The first 6 months for Brolin were fantastic. Now we see Mouse, struggling massively at the T-sides. They can't figure it out. I fear the same could potentially happen with huNter. As you said, it is early day. I very much agree. I think the calling during Blast was fantastic. I think the combination between him and Saw was fantastic. We also got a lot of peeks into the timeouts. I don't know if you noticed during the final, but there was a lot of there was a lot from Saw in particular, and I think the production, obviously, they get to it. We don't, so we don't have access to it 24/7, even though I would love to. But I think they sensed and they felt that there's definitely more impact coming from him, which is part of the story, which is why we need to show that. One bit that I loved was that he completely called out Sun Payers, 4 rounds into, was it Inferno, I think, or maybe Dust 2, where he just said, like, Sun Payers, what are you doing? Like, play normal, stop overpeaking, stop doing. He basically called out a player within the timeout, and obviously he has that working relationship with Sun Payers. I think that's sort of the energy I'm sensing that he's getting with huNter as well, that they are joint in-game leaders within that team. Obviously, Saw does all the planning, he does all the hard work together with huNter. They try to create a strategy, they try to create a way of getting the most out of the players, and as huNter even said in an interview with us on the desk, like sometimes he doesn't really have to do too much mid-round calling or too much thinking per se, because the way they set up their T-sides right now is simplified. It's a lot of set executes, it's a lot of defaults into an execute, and it's a lot of deep playbook. I think huNter told us that the playbook within G2 is the deepest it's ever been.
Oh, wow.
But that also means that it's a lot of set plays, and you only have a deep playbook if you have a lot of set plays or a lot of different variations of the default that you then keep practicing over and over and over again. So instead of him having to micromanage everyone in the middle of a default, well, he just say default into, I don't know, split A, and everyone knows exactly what to do at that point. So I think that's part of the reason. I would love to talk to Saw about it. I would love to talk to huNter about it as well. But I think part of what Saw probably has thought is that we need to make the playbook as deep as possible, but also as simple as possible, so huNter doesn't have to do too much mid-round calling. He doesn't have to be a Nico, basically. He has to have a deep understanding of the playbook, help build the playbook, and obviously be aware of what tools he has within the playbook. But then when it gets to the calling and being in those hectic moments, you don't necessarily need a guy like Nico that is micromanaging everyone, like Glaive did in the old days as well. You were constantly being, whenever you're in a 3v3, he would micromanage you down to your every move, press D, press W, go here, go there, peek now, etc. I don't think you need that if you have good players around you, and if you have a playbook that is practice enough and deep enough, I guess, and simple enough to understand. So that's a notion of it. Early days, as you said, let's see what happens. Now everyone is looking at G2. Now everyone is going to anti-strat G2. There were even a couple of matches heading into the tournament that they hadn't played, so they couldn't even be anti-strat.
Yes.
Which Overpass was a great example. Didn't go too well for G2, but now people can look at them, right? And that's always a different task as well, having to update your playbook or having to mask your defaults, etc., etc. Another thing I just wanted to point on, because it just struck a nerve, and let this be a message to everyone out there. You said it yourself, like when you look at the twists of the world, the device of the world, Valve back in the day when he was even good in North, Electronic for that matter as well. When good players, or Yakinder, when good players become in-game leaders out of necessity, because no one else can do it within the team and not because they want to, it's going to fail 9 out of 10 times. And I am sick and fucking tired of organizations not looking at the data that we have, that it's always going to fail. As you said, if you constantly have in the back of your mind that I should probably still be a star player, if you're Twist, I should probably still be a star player, or I should probably be in Vitality right now, I should probably go back to Face. How are you going to dedicate yourself 100% to be the leader and build that playbook and build a system within the team? It's the same thing over and over and over. And that's why I go crazy when I see players, who is left as free agents, or coaches even for that matter, or talent for that matter, be like, yeah, looking for a team, I can play that role, that role, that role, and that role. No, you can't play 4 different roles, you fucking idiot. You choose one role, or maybe 2 roles tops, and that's going to be your specialty, right? Because you're never going to be good enough if you're focused on 4 different things at the same time. And if you don't believe that you are good enough at just specializing at that role, that you want to open up the floor, that you can play 3 different roles, that's basically you just telling me that you're not good enough to be part of my project. And I know that sounds harsh, but I've even told, I think that was Devilwalk, I told at one point, he made a tweet that he was willing to coach, be a player, or work at the desk as a talent. Like, sure thing, that, pick one. what is it that you actually want to do? Because you're not going to be a great coach unless you're 100% dedicated to being a great coach. You're not going to be a great desk talent unless you're willing to travel 200 days a year and dedicated to become a great desk talent. And you're not going to be a great player unless you do the same thing. So I hate it. I hate it, and we have so many examples. You mentioned a few of them in Yakinda, in Twist, in Electronic, and I know we have Apex as well, but he wanted it, right? He wanted to be an in-game leader. It was his idea. I think huNter, he has been asked to be an in-game leader for 2 years. He said no, he said no, he said no. Now he wants it, right? And that's why I think that his likelihood of finding success in the future as well is significantly higher than some of the wasted potential we saw with Device, we saw with Yakinda, we saw with Twist for that matter as well. Also, by the way, when a player turns into an in-game leader and they then go back to becoming a star player, there seems to be a bit of a drop-off. I don't think we ever get to see Twist at the same high level. I would love to, but it's unlikely. Same for Yakinda, same for Electronic, same for all of them. They lose that edge for some reason.
No, it does also seem like, the classic example for me is Shox. I even got to talk to Shox at the end of CS2, and he even just said, the problem is I could never sort of not think like an IGL after that. Whereas the beauty of someone like Shox, if anyone knows back in the days, the guy was like the Cristiano Ronaldo. He had the ultimate diva mentality. He was never fucking thinking about everyone, mate. He was thinking about putting the ball in the top or winning the clutch, as it were. So you almost don't want the guy to think that much. I know what you mean. By the way, the other analogy I often give, because I feel like it's the same exact scenario, is when someone who is the secondary AWPer goes, I can be the AWPer for a while if you need. It's like, that better literally be like...
Start my career.
Listen,
start my career.
But here's the problem, Pimp. That's why I even bring it up, because at the time it was true. If you only have to do it for a month or two, you could do it. But the issue is, after a month or two, first of all, as they did with you, they might treat you like, we're just not a good enough AWPer. It's like, that's not even my fucking role, but okay. And then also, it's just like the IGL thing. Everyone might have a little honeymoon period where it's cool, but as soon as people figure you out, like the boring part is, Pimp, is if you do it the first tournament, they're not expecting it. When they watch your demo, though, and they're waiting for you on all the angles, and they're treating you like you are Kenny, it gets really fucking hard, right?
Yeah, it's. I think we had a conversation on one of our reflection episodes, but it kind of destroyed my career. I was a great rifler. I was a very good secondary AWPer, and I was asked to be the main AWPer, and I said yes, and I was decent but not great, and then I got kicked, and I never got back to my rifling level. I think maybe I thought as an AWPer, maybe I lost some confidence, who knows, but that was like, if there's one decision in my career that I would have wished I never said yes to, even though that I wanted it to happen myself, it was to become a primary AWPer, because I was a great secondary AWPer, but I was not good enough to be the primary AWPer. I was not good enough to, as you said, I could go up against Kenny S 1 or 2 times in 1 or 2 games, and I beat him a couple of times as well, but the 3rd time, 4th time, 5th time, 6th time, he would beat me consistently from that point onwards, right? Once he figured me out, or once I stagnated at my level. And I think it's a great analogy, because it's the same thing with the in-game leaders. It's also a thing of, let that be an advice to the players as well who do that. If you transition to become an in-game leader and you then want to revert and go back, odds are you're never going to be as great as you were before. Another thing is that you put yourself in a very risky spot. I said the same when Broland transitioned into becoming the in-game leader for Mouse. You are now the most expendable player in that team. If that doesn't work out the first couple of months, you will be cut. You will not be invited back in the role you had before. You'll just be cut. Now, Broland, is he working out right now in Mouse? There's tendencies that we see now that the T-sides are struggling. If you were to kick anyone from Mouse right now, if you were to replace anyone within the Mouse team right now, you're looking at Broland, right? He's the one that's expendable. So you also do jeopardize a bit of your career if you make that transition. So that's why I always say, if you want to transition into becoming a primary AWP, if you want to transition your role, you want to be a desk talent, you want to be a coach, you want to be an in-game leader, make damn sure that's your plan for the next 3 years. Make damn sure that you're going to dedicate everything you can to that one specific thing in your life. Otherwise, you're just going to play it at 50% in a lot of different fields, and that's not going to be good enough. So that's also, no offense towards Broland, because I think he was a great player. I think Broland was a great role player in Mouse before transitioning into becoming an in-game leader. He was more safe in that role than he is as an in-game leader. So it's also with added risk and added pressure in that regard.
Yes. No, the reason I'd also agree, I even think it does apply to huNter, is because I think Broland right now is in the spot that Huxley was, not at the end when he got kicked, but when he had the roster with JKS. Because the other problem you have, Pimp, is when you have a roster where people perceive the other 4 players are all good in their roles and only the IGL's the expendable one, the reason why you're the most likely person to be cocked is, I meant to say cocked, but actually cocked is also appropriate Freudian slip there, is because, bro, think about how many other IGLs would love to join that team. team and have that squad of players. Like, I always used to think that about the Huxley example. It's like, mate, if someone like Carrigan really did say yes, he pretty much would just do it overnight, because then he'd have that team plus he's Carrigan in he. Whereas you made your name off that roster, right? I thought, and one thing, if we just run through the roster a bit, the interesting thing about G2 is there's interesting angles for everyone. So actually, a guy you briefly touched on there, probably the guy who's done the least so far in this team is Pius the AWPer, believe it or not. Actually, at the moment, it hasn't been that big a deal. Also, when he was in Heroic, he was a bit whatever. Like, it took, people have to remember, he was on the bench for a while at Falcons. It took him time to get going again. And I even thought early on in G2, he's actually been off his game, but he wasn't that great at the final. But I'll tell you what, this is also the Saw angle. This is his boy. This is the guy who's been with him the whole time. So he's obviously choosing him for a good reason. That does remind me of those football managers where they have that player you don't think's that good, who's, I don't know, like fucking central midfielder or something, but he knows their systems, and they think, I know this guy, I can make it work. This guy must be the Sun Pius Whisperer, because, like, I tell you what, they needed him in that Furia series, mate, and that one he was fucking cooking. Also, I do think a lot of people would look at this player and go, oh, is he even that good anymore? So I think if you're Saw, you will get a lot of credit if the months go by and he keeps getting better and he becomes actually like a good AWPer again. Because obviously it's a good gamble. There's not that many good AWPers, and he was a very good AWPer once upon a time, end of CS2. I even thought actually he got hated on. You know, at the end of Falcons, before they made the Nico move, everyone always goes, Magisk was the only one playing well. It's like, yeah, but that's because they kicked out fucking Sun Pius for simple, mate. Sun Pius was actually all right. He wasn't a star player, but Falcons, if you remember, was a fucking dog shit team. They used to be irrelevant. Like, they used to go out in the beginning of the group stage. I thought he was all right. So I don't hate the gamble, but I tell you what, this player clearly is, as well as huNter IGL. This is a gamble from Saw, though. Like, he hasn't gone for one of those Eastern European up-and-coming AWPers, or he hasn't tried to nick someone else's AWPer. He's got his own AWPer from the past few teams, and he believes he can run it back. So I'm interested to see that one, because actually, so far, that hasn't been some crazy honeymoon period in this team, mate. I've got to see where he goes with Saw. I'm interested to see this Sun Pius angle.
Me too, and I was surprised during Blast London as well, because we got to speak to huNter doing the winners interview after the semi-final, and I asked him about some players. I asked him about, like, who's the secondary voice, who's the one helping you out now. You don't have Nico by your side, so who's your secondary voice? And he said Sun Pius. He said he's putting in an awful lot of work in preparing, finding new setups, especially on the CT sides. He's the secondary voice within the game from time to time, calling setup, etc., etc. And I was kind of stunned at the disc, because the last thing I heard from players who had played with Sun Pius a year ago when he was in Ends, when he was in Falcons, and even probably the beginning of G2 as well, was that he was a bit too passive. Like, he couldn't even call his own positions.
Right.
What you like from an AWPer on the CT side is that you want the AWPer to be like, I'm going to go A and get a peek here, I'm going to go B and get a peek here, I'm going to do this setup in middle, and then everyone around him can sort of figure out what they can do to support you. And apparently he was not that guy, at least not in Falcons, is what I heard, that he was a bit too passive and maybe a little bit too afraid of making the plays that would make him look good. So to hear that he's now the secondary voice in G2, and he's the one putting in a lot of work, and creating CT setups and helping out huNter, being, I guess, the secondary caller, at least according to huNter himself. I don't see why he would lie about that. That adds value to Sun Pius, because I do agree, like, from a pure output perspective, especially in a role as an AWP, it's not really been that great. He wasn't that great in Heroic. He was okay. He was okay in Falcons, but not that great. And same could be said here in G2. I think there's something to be said about his playoff performances, though. Like, he seems to be playing as good, if not in the playoff, and that's a nice little attribute to have, especially when you're playing next to huNter, who had the same thing going for him in the vast majority of his G2 career. So maybe there's something to that. And then he also just seems to be a bit more versatile. Like, most of the impact he found during Blast was actually in pistol rounds and with the rifle as well, where he seems to be great, which also gives, huNter more tools in that toolbox. He doesn't necessarily have to be restricted by the fact that there's an AWPer on his team. He can play rifle rounds on the T side where 5 people have a rifle, which may be great for the playstyle they're playing right now, given it's very much out of spawn, very explosive, a minute left of the round, you go into and execute, etc., etc. It was very simplified, what we saw during Blast, but that may even play into that. Reminds me a bit of Liquid, when they had their stint where Nitro was the AWPer or Stewie was the AWPer.
Yes.
There was a lot of maps where they played 5 rifles on the T side, which was a meta for 64 days or whatever, but it gave them a lot of freedom and gave them an explosivity on the server that they couldn't utilize. And I see some of the same tendencies. So I think for some players, it's if you want to stand the test of time, he needs to find a bit more impact with the AWP, but I have more confidence in that happening now, given that he is the secondary caller on the CT side at the very least. So he should be calling a game that is going to suit him for the future. And then question is if he has the individual level to actually pull off the shots and hit, I guess, the mechanical peak that he needs to, but that's only to be seen. He'll have the chance given the responsibility he has.
By the way, definitely interested in the idea that he's like a secondary caller almost, or some like device shit. That's kind of cool. Also, I do think the interesting thing you pointed out there is people don't realise this. When back in the day we used to say about Sampaius, he's a big game player. That's like the euphemism we always use on the desk. I don't think people realise how rare that is, Pim. Because notice I'm not saying he's the best player. But what's weird is, it's funny, we all understand you're going to get players like the Stowns of the world, where they're good players, but they just keep falling apart in the playoffs. Senzu was doing this until about like 2 months ago. Bro, what's it crazy about people like Sampaius is I agree. It doesn't matter what level of form he's in. There's just something about playoff matches like have the opposite effect of this guy. My analogy would almost be, if you think about combat sports, there's actually a weird type of fighter in combat sports who sometimes it's actually when they're getting sort of fucked up that it like activates their like killer instinct mode, mate. It's like, you know, when they're pushed back or they've actually already cracked it, but that just makes them go crazy. So I agree, he does have like an extra quality to him that's a kind of compelling in that sense. I'm with you.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.